Hi everyone. We are back as always. As always, we have our ninth masterclass ready to kickstart. Today we have Gianluca with us. He is new in this masterclass scene. He is one of our best front-end developers, and he is here with us to talk about how to create a UI component. Hello, Gianluca. How are you?
Well, hi everybody. Hi Joao. Well, I'm pretty good. First of all, I want to thank you for the nice introduction. Yeah, just to first introduce myself a little bit. I'm Gianluca, and I'm one of the front-end developers working at Interactive. For today's masterclass, we are going to talk about UI components. More specifically, the topic is going to be how to create a UI component.
Okay.
Joao, you want to go through the
Yeah,
index?
I can talk about this index today. Our masterclass is divided in these topics that we have here for you to see. It's first of all we are going to talk about what is a UI component, then why do we componentize our UI, two types of UI components that you are going to see really shortly, and some practical examples, and finally we are going to end it with the develop high credit card. That is one thing that Gianluca is going to explain throughout his presentation. So without further ado, enjoy this masterclass, and Gianluca, you can take this presentation from now on.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Joao. So, well, as Joao said, yeah, we are gonna first introducing what it is a UI component. So I will just try to give a brief introduction on the nature and what it is exactly a UI component, and especially why UI components, like the developing UI components, is becoming, I would say, vital aspect of modern web development and modern web application. So I think we can get started. So with this introduction, I would like to reference this quote that I found online. It's a quote from Facebook. I couldn't find who was the specific person who come up with this quote, but so it's just quoted as Facebook. But in my opinion, it's really useful because in only one sentence, it managed to describe perfectly what it is a UI component. So as we can read, it says that components let you split the user interface into independent, reusable pieces and think about each piece in isolation. So in my opinion, I would say the main keywords to take away from this sentence, from this quote, are independent, reusable, and isolation. Independent, the first one, I would say this word describes the nature of a UI component. It describes a UI component as an independent entity, I would say. Because if we think about a UI component, I don't know, we can think about a button, for example. That specific component, in order to exist, it doesn't have to be placed in any broader context. So it doesn't have to be placed in a user interface in order to exist and exactly to perform certain action. A button, it's in its own nature it's just a button. So when we think about your component, we can think as a single entities. Then reusable, these other keywords, I would say that this one describes the main objective of a UI component, the main purpose of your component, which is its own reusability. As we say, we build UI components once and then we reuse them many, many times. So this is the purpose, because then we are gonna reuse them for in many different user interfaces and in many different scenarios, for example. And then the last one, isolation. These last keywords, I would say that describes more probably the design, during the designing process, when you come up with an idea for a UI component. You think about that UI component in its own isolation, again, as its own independent entity, without putting it in a broader context. So I think this sentence perfectly describes what the UI component in its essence. So now I would like to move on with the next section, and this is why we I want to talk about why we componentize the development of user interfaces, and why we think when we think about user interfaces, we think about components, like as single components, first of all. And before like giving the reason and why we build user interfaces following this structure, following this kind of componentization, I want to briefly talk about atomic design. As you can see on the image in this slide, there is like this graph that seems like I don't know, like a slide coming from chemistry lectures. But atomic design, it's basically like a design and development theory that Brett Frost come up. Brett Frost is a web designer, but it's considered like a guru in modern web development and web design. And he basically come up with this theory because he said like that if nowadays we want to build like modern, not only modern, but I would say like user interface that have coherent design, like coherent design that can that we can maintain and scalable in the scale in the future easily. We should think about UI user interfaces in its smallest unit, like in its smallest element. So the comparison with chemistry, we can start seeing, like this comparison with chemistry. In chemistry, we have like in nature, we have like the smallest element, the smallest unit, which is the atom. The atom cannot be, it's an element that cannot be split further down. And then a group of atoms makes up a molecule. And it's really similar with the case of UI component. Now, I want to say that I won't go further down like into atomic design with the explanation of atomic design, because otherwise it will take like, I don't know, other 3 or 4 master classes. But for the case of UI component, we can focus just on the atoms and the molecules, just on the first 2 steps of the atomic design process. And this is exactly like how we should approach the development of user interfaces. So starting from the smallest unit, that make up, like a more complex unit, like a UI component. So for example, as the molecule. Then to better understand this process of atomic design thinking, as you can see on this slide, you can see that I would like to make this other comparison with Legos, for example. When you are building an object, for example, with Legos, you can see on the picture that there are these 3 different stages. The first one, you can see that there are like a lot of Lego pieces like stacked upon each other super randomly. And then on the second phase, you can see that all these elements of these Lego pieces have been carefully structured and carefully organized. And then as a last result, we have our final object built, which in this case is a car. But this is really important to understand this process, for example, this Lego comparison, because it's really, really similar to the process that we follow in order to build UI components and then user interfaces as final products. What matters, and it's really important on the reason why we componentize. We first componentize our user interfaces, because as with the Legos, for example, if we want to build a car as a final product, the most logic things that we can do is first to focus and and try to understand which are the building blocks that make up our final object, in this case a car. If we think like a car, every car is made up of wheels, for example, like wheels, engine, windows, doors. So the easiest things to do will be like to first like building all these building blocks in its own. So we can see the relation with building UI components on its own. And then when we will have like, after we will have all these building blocks already made, it's just going to be a matter of assembling all these building blocks together, and then we will have our final product. In this case, it's a car. But the greatest things, and why we consider that this kind of process, this kind of atomic design thinking and componentization approach of user interfaces, it's really, really powerful. It's because, as you can see from the Legos example, it's even if we want to build, for example, other type of cars, we call, for example, if we want to build a truck or a Formula One car, for example, it's just a matter of reassembling these UI components and these building blocks. So what's going to change basically is just the way we reorganize the building blocks, and then we're going to have another type of car. And this is exactly the same that happens in modern web development, in modern UI development. Now I'm showing you these other slides where you have on the left side, you have the UI kit from Airbnb. The UI kit, it's basically a UI components library. And you can see basically here, like this one, it's a collection of all the UI components and elements from Airbnb. You can see that there is a collection of buttons, text, images, even like user avatars. And on the right, you have like the final product is the final page from Airbnb. And the great things about that I want to stress, like it's really important. Once we get used to this kind of thinking, so to this kind of componentization of user interfaces, I'm pretty sure like that just looking at the final product, at the final result, so in this case at the Airbnb page, I'm pretty sure that everybody will be able to recognize the single component in its own nature, as its own as an independent entity again. So yeah, I mean, if we look at the Airbnb page, we can recognize, for example, the single images that represents a card. It's like a card of one of the flat that we are searching on Airbnb. There is the card of the map, an input search, the logo. So we have all this this pattern that is repeating basically every time. And this helps a lot because I'm pretty sure, for example, like when we are visiting other pages of the same products, in this case of Airbnb, we are going to notice that the design, it's really easy to follow because it's coherent. So you create it once, you create like a UI kit and a UI component library once, and then you will be able to use it in all your different products that you want to create. So yeah, that's just to finish the componentization of user interfaces. Now I would like to talk about the different type of UI components that we can build. So I mean, like probably at this point, it can be like more open, I would say, to discussion, to different interpretation. But in our opinion, we consider that there are like two main types of UI component. And the first one are the foundation components. I mean, as the word says, foundation components represents like are like the basic ones. So the UI are the components that are more simple in their own nature, and usually are like they can be just simple HTML elements like just text, buttons, or link, for example. And I think that it's really important to remember about foundation components is that foundation components are really, really targeted in its scope, in its scope and in its utilization, like in its own use. Again, like you can see, like I gave this example of a button. I'm pretty sure that when you are creating a button as a UI component, you are thinking about that specific UI component as for just one type of use, because I mean you're not going to use a button in order to display some information and text, but you're using a button in order to perform an action, to confirm something, for example, inside a form, but basically it's in order to perform an action. So they are really, really specific for their use. Then the second one are the composed components, and as the word says, composed components are usually they're more complex in their own nature. In fact, the same word, it says like composed. They can be made of group from different HTML elements grouped together. And obviously, like composed components, they give like a broader range, a broader action in matter of customization and styling. And to give like some example, like of composed components, they can be like accordions, cards, or carousel, for example. So now that we talked about the different types of UI components that you can develop and you can build, the most important things to remember for any type of UI components that you want to build and that you are planning to build is you should always keep this point in mind. Is that like you should always like try to abstract any business logic from the UI component. And I'm saying this like, okay, exactly like with business logic, I mean like the logic that is specific to a certain application, to a certain product. So just to give an example, imagine that you're building a UI component like a card, for example, for a specific client. And you know already that that client with that, for example, with that card is going to display some numbers, a list of numbers. The thing is, you shouldn't limit the UI component, that UI component, just to display that certain data type, that certain number. Otherwise, you're gonna compromise the usability of the component. So just try to always to abstract any business logic from your development process, from your development of UI components, and yeah, you can guarantee the usability of the component itself. Then, okay, just to quickly finish this section, yeah, we can see, I mean, after, you know, like after this, all this description, I would say, you can see already which are the advantages of building UI components and UI components library for your UI development. And I mean, they are pretty clear. One of these, it's speed, because I mean, if if a developer has a UI component library available in order to build and develop like a certain product or application, his development speed is going to increase like 10,000, like really crazy, I would say, like by it's gonna increase like of a certain amount. And then of course it's a UI components library as well. They're meant to be easy to use, because the UI components library usually come with a proper documentation, and the documentation at the end of the day, it's just like you can think like as a set of instruction for the developers. So you can follow this set of instruction, and you will immediately understand how to use that specific UI component and how to use it in the context of its own the application development. And then the two other things that helps having that really help when you have a UI components library available are that if those library are built properly, they will already solve two of the biggest issues that front-end developers they have to deal with, which are compatibility and accessibility. If your UI component has already been tested, that means that it's gonna work like in every type of screen sizes and different browser. So you will have like the cross browser and cross device compatibility already solved. This won't be a problem that the developer will have to face. And then usually good libraries, they have to adhere to accessibility guidelines as well. So if like me as a developer, I won't have to deal with these two issues, my life will be much easier already. So yeah, moving on now, we are already approaching our final, like the final example of our UI component. But I want to, here I would like to talk about these two words, that if we bring these two words together, and this I'm talking about low code development platform and UI components. I'm talking about low code because for this specific case, for the UI component that we are gonna show, it was built using OutSystem, the low code platform. I would say like this word, like combining this word of low code development with UI components makes like the perfect match, because low code development, low code platforms are already they're already meant to increase development time quite a lot. And if you can develop your UI component using a low code platform, it's like I will call it, it's a done deal, because it's you will have all your tools already in the same platform, and it's just going to be a matter of calling like those specific components or like a certain module that you're using, and then you can easily utilize those UI components inside your in this case inside the Service Studio platform or any low code platform. So yeah, so now we reached our the final part, which is the example that I'm going to talk about. And the UI component that I'm showing now, it's the high credit card, is the one that you can see on this image. And I think like the high credit card, it's a really good example to show, because it's a UI component that it's quite customizable in matter of design. Probably it's although it seems that it cannot be, probably can have like a more limited, I would say, reusability. This is not true because like, or just this component can be used for many different type of application and products. You can use like this for I don't know, like for any e-commerce website, or even for SaaS service, like for subscription based service, for example. And then even this component has it's quite customizable in matter of logic, because I mean, like the user can wire the users they can wire their credit card in order to make like online purchasement and online payment. So this was a really, really good, I think it's a good example like to show for this masterclass. Then before jumping onto the Service Studio platform in OutSystem, I want to show what are like the main stages that goes into into the process of building a UI development. Well, in this case, more specific for the high credit card, but this development process is applicable like in any UI components development. And in our opinion, there are like 4 different stages. The first one is the planning, the plan. And I will say, guys, this is probably like it's the most important, because basically will determine the rest of your workflow, so the rest of your development process. If you carefully plan the way you're going to approach the development of your UI component, then your life will be much easier. And I mean, like you can see from this image, this is like just looking at this image, in my opinion, it's already calling the example of the Legos building blocks and the atomic design. The most important part of the first stage of the planning is to analyze the design of the UI component that we want to build. So for this specific case, we can see that we have this credit card, and we identified like that for this credit card there are 5 different building blocks. Let's call it like this. There are 5 different there are 5 different blocks. There is like the first one is the card image, which is basically is the image. It's where we are gonna place the image background, or where we are gonna give like different colors for the card background. Then, and of course, like I want to say that this part it's quite customizable as well, because you can apply many different colors or images. Then there is the card number, and I would say this block probably is the least customizable, because I mean every credit card works with a different set of numbers. So I mean your operation is quite limited. Like in that block you can just receive like a set of numbers. Then on the other 3, we can see that we have the content left, content right, and the card name. And these ones are quite customizable, because I mean we can decide to have like for example, like as this example show, we can have the expiration date or the card name owners at the bottom. And on the content right, there is again, like there is another date, but we could, for example, we could even decide to place, I don't know, like I don't remember if it is called the CVV or the CCV, which is that secret number that you use when you have to make online payment. Usually that number, I think it's placed on the back of the credit card, but there are some credit cards that they put it like on the front. So it depends. I mean, the things that you have to understand, like these 3 blocks are quite customizable. So it's up to you the way you want to design it and you want to present it. So yeah, this first one was the planning part, and then obviously we have the building process. So we have to start like structuring our UI component following the pattern that we build during the planning. So I think now we can jump onto the Service Studio, and we can analyze. I can show you the UI component. Things I wanna say now, guys. It's now for this masterclass, I'm not gonna show like each step. Like I'm not gonna build the component now in this moment, because otherwise it will take like quite a long time. But it's already but it's really helpful, because we are gonna analyze the structure of the component, so you can understand like how you can build it and what kind of pattern you can follow. So as you can see now, I've opened, it's okay, for this purpose, it's a specific application that is called iCredit Card. But for this case, we created like this other application because it's more for a showcasing purpose. It's more for an example purpose. Usually when you're building, for example, your your UI components library, what you will do, you will have one single application that will contain a module with all your components basically. And then on the application that you are building, you're just gonna call the module with all the components. So we can move on to the iCredit Card application, and we can see that here we have our component, the iCredit Card. And basically, every time you want to create a component, basically you're just going to create a block. And the block is going to be the container, basically, of your component. Is where it's going to contain basically all the structure of the UI component. Then here we are using like a set of input parameters. And this is really important because we are going to need this input parameter for different purposes. For example, here you can see that we have this input parameter, which is the credit card number. And this input variable, we are going to need it in order to display the credit card number. Then we have these other two, which is isText card and isMall. These two input variables are Boolean data type, and these are gonna we are gonna need this input variable in order to dynamically, I would say more, dynamically, but probably more exactly, like to conditionally apply certain CSS classes. So, for example, if we are using usually like as a default, we are using a white text, but we can even decide that we want to use a dark text to display the information of the credit card. So if we set this to, when we will set this to true, then automatically we will apply a different CSS classes for the stylization. And then another things I want to show you here, we have in our component, we have the style sheet where basically we apply here. There is like all the CSS styling that we need, like for the iCredit Card for our UI component. So we can move on now on the widget tree. Here, basically the widget tree in Service Studio, it's basically it's the HTML structure of the component. So here you can see it's made of a different, like it's a mix of containers, which are divs element, containers, and placeholders. So another things that probably it's important to talk about, it's basically, as I said, every time we create a component in Service in OutSystem using Service Studio, basically we are going to use it's a mix of placeholders and input parameters. I won't say like that there is a straight answer to what we should use, whether a placeholder, if it is a placeholder or input parameters. But the thing is always depend on the situation and on the context of the UI component that you are building. The things are probably the pattern that you have to follow. It's that you are going to use a placeholder when you want to leave like a broader action of customization of that specific part of the UI component. And then you're going to use an input parameters, for example, when you want to limit the for example, the action of the developers that is going to use the UI component. So imagine, for example, like like if you want to use if you want that in a certain section of the component, for example, you want that the developers is gonna place just certain data types, so for example, just integers or numbers or text, then you're going to use an input parameter, because with our input parameters, you are limiting the utilization of that content just with certain data types. So probably you can keep this in mind. So, okay, as I said, we have our HTML structure, and here we have like the outer container that basically contains all the different content of the credit card. we have this placeholder, which is going to contain, this placeholder is the image placeholder, and is containing the image background that we saw in the example. And then like for each container, even like for each container and each placeholder, we are applying a certain CSS classes. As you can see here, we are using this credit card image that it has the style already applied for the stylization of that specific content. And then, for example, for this case here, for this section where we are placing the credit card number, we are using a set of 4 different expression widget. And the reason why we are using an expression widget is because we are, for this particular section, we are using a JavaScript function, a JavaScript method, that basically what it's gonna do, it's gonna split like the number of the credit card in 4 units, and after 4 digits is gonna place a space. So because I mean, you have to imagine that probably will be the case that this component is gonna dynamically receive some data of the, I mean, obviously like some data that comes from a database of I don't know, of a product that has already like a set of credit cards registered from the users from the user. So if we follow this process, we in a way we have already automatized this step. So automatically the component receive the credit card number, and is gonna already make this process is gonna split the credit card number in 4 different sections. So this logic is already taken care during this part, during the UI component development part, and the developers that is gonna build this application later won't have to take care of this issue, of this problem. And then, for example, here, even in using this expression widget, we could apply another, for example, an extra logic that, for example, just from the first 4 digits, we will be able to recognize what type of credit cards the user is using in that moment. And what type of credit card, I mean, like what type of network. If the credit card is a Visa, Mastercard, we could simply implement this like with this expression widget. So yeah, then we have like this other container that has these 2 placeholders. This is like for the middle right content and the left content, and then the name. Maybe one last thing that I want to say regarding the structure of the UI component, regarding the use of CSS and the styling. As you can see, as I told you, like every placeholder and container has a certain CSS class applied, as you can see. But then we can see that the image, the middle right, the middle left, and the name, they have this extra CSS class applied, which is PH. And PH, we use this one whenever we want to leave extra customization space for that specific content, for this specific part of the content. Basically, what does it do? Like, what does it do? This CSS class, this PH, it will determine whether we are displaying content or not. So if we are displaying like some content, which can be text or whatever, basically it will display the placeholder with the content in the browser. If we are not placing any content, it won't render at all this section. So for example, if here in this placeholder, I'm not putting any information like any text or anything, this won't show in the browser as the final result. So yeah, I think we can open now this in the browser, so you can see the final result and see the sample pages. Let me see if it's showing. Yeah, and there we go. Here we have the our component. Is the documentation of our, basically, yeah, this represents, it's like, yeah, the documentation of our component. Here you can see when we create, it's really important to create a sample page with the component, with the UI component that we are building, because basically the sample page, the purpose of the sample page is to showcase all the all the scenario, all the example in that you can use your UI component. So for example, as you can see here, we have different example of the credit card, the credit card. Here we can use, for example, we can customize and use like a smaller size for the credit card. Here there is the example with like using a light text, as I told you. Then another example with a dark text. And then, as I told you, like we have this other section that can be quite customized. And as you can see, the content here is distributed in different way. Here we just have the right content, and here we have the the left and the right content. So it's up to developers then the way in which way he wants to customize it and display it. So what never change, as I told you, it's basically the number. This is going to always be a number. And then here it's some different example on how to use the in which way you like exactly that, just to show that you can even change the background image. You can display like different images, and and that's and this is like just to show to deliver like to the developers. Then we can go back to the to the presentation. Sorry, it was off. So as I said, these are the first two stages, like they are the plan and the building and the build part. And then the last two, the third one is the testing, and I want to spend just like little time here, but I want to stress that this is like the testing part, guys. It's probably like the most important and the fundamental part of, we'll say, like before delivering your final products, so your final UI component. So what I should say, like that you should never skip testing if you're really serious about your product quality, and for this specific purpose about your UI component quality. You should at all costs try test and test it like for many different scenario, because I will guarantee you, maybe I cannot say like 100%, because probably you can be really lucky, but I would say 99% of the time, if you won't perform the necessary testing of your UI component, you will have your client coming back at you complaining that the UI component is not working for some specific task and in some specific context. And then you're gonna waste like an enormous amount of time, and not only time but money, in order to fix those bugs and all those problems that the client found. And then the last part is the documentation. The documentation, I think we already saw it. Is the basically, as you can see, is the sample page that we create when we the sample page, as I said, like it represents the documentation of your UI component. It's really important because basically it works as a set of instruction for the developers. So the developers, you will see like all the different scenarios in which kind of way you can use the component. And then another things I want to that you can see on this image. This one on the right is the API design. Basically, this is the API design the documentation. So I mean, the developers will see that this component is made by this set of placeholders, and each placeholder comes with a description. So you will know for this specific placeholders, why you need to use this specific placeholder and what is gonna put in this placeholder, so in this content. And then the input parameters, like in which way you can use the input parameters and create some dynamic styling and dynamic logic. And I think this is all from my side. Before passing the word back to Joao, I just want to finish, and I just want to say that I really invite you guys to visit like the High Interactive Components Library, the UI kit from High Interactive, because I think it will work, it will be really useful for you if you want to build your own UI component library. It can serve as a good example, so you can do some brainstorming and to take some ideas. But I think you will learn a lot. It will be a really good. It will serve as a good pattern for you to follow if you want to build your UI component. And with that, Joao, you can take from here.
Okay. Thanks, Gianluca, and congratulations for your presentation. You really did very well, very well. And I think that the ones at home listening to you really got what building a UI component takes, and the work they need to put on to deliver these components with this kind of quality that you have shown. And taking your words about the UI components we have on our website, you can also check the latest blog article that Gianluca wrote about this specific topic. This one I really encourage you to read and to better understand what Gianluca has just said on this masterclass. And without further to say, I would like to thank you all for studying by and listening until the end of this masterclass, without forgetting to give us the like button that we are always encouraging you to do, and to share this with your friends and family, so they can see what we have for the next masterclass. We are going to our 10th one. We are going to surpass the 2 digit mark next month, and we have plenty more content for you cooking up, so we can deliver masterclasses like this with this kind of quality. And without further to say, thank you all. Thanks, Gianluca, and bye bye. See you next month.
Thanks, everybody. Bye bye. Bye bye.